welcome to this week's episode, our 50th episode of Seeking Proof, Finding Grace. I'm your host, Ron Campbell, and this week, as with every week, I want to start off by reminding you of the most important truth in the entire universe. God loves you. And I hope what you're starting to see, again, as we've continued this journey, is God's fingerprint becoming increasingly visible the closer we get to our little planet Earth. And tonight, we reach planet Earth, and we're going to talk about what part of what makes our planet so very special compared to everything else out in the universe. You know, what we've been doing is looking at, once we reach the starting point of the universe, whether you call it the Big Bang, whether it's the creation event, whatever it is, to where we are today, the series of events that led to us on this little blue planet is so implausible and so improbable, and so many steps along the way cannot possibly be attributed to random chance, that what we see is the fingerprint of intentional design. Sooner or later, if at every step along the way you find things fine-tuned, however you want to call it, but you find things conveniently organized in favor of life existing on this one little blue planet floating in space, at some point, we all have to recognize that the odds of this just being random chance are zero. And what you run into is the fingerprint of design. And that's where we find ourselves today. So we're gonna talk about that next week, and we're gonna wrap all of this up as we go forward. Because again, this isn't a God of the gaps kind of thing. We're not just saying, well, we don't know what caused all this, so we're just gonna say God did it. It would be wrong to do that. But what's equally wrong is to look at everything going on around us and go, well, we don't know what caused that. It definitely couldn't have been God. Therefore, it had to be luck. It had to be random chance, because that's scientific. That's equally wrong. Because at some point, you have to recognize there's no way luck accounts for this. Luck can account for a certain number of things. But if you assume luck lasts forever, luck can answer anything, try walking into a casino with a pocket full of money and see how you come out with a theory like luck solves everything. That is not going to go well for you. And it's not going to go well here either. So we're going to wrap this up tonight. And then next week, we're going to pull the entire journey together. By the way, spoiler alert, we are up to over 30 items so far that have piled up very conveniently to our benefit. Over 30 so far. Tonight we're going to cross way over 40. So as we look at this tonight, we've gotten all the way from the beginning point of the universe to where we are. And now we look at our little planet and we say, okay, is there anything special about Earth that seems to defy the odds? That seems to show the fingerprint of a creator? And the very first thing that you look at is our planet, obviously. When you look at Earth, the size of Earth is in the perfect zone that it needs to be. And I guess this could have been part of what we discussed last week. We were talking last week more about where Earth was as it related to all these various zones. But this time what we're looking at now is the planet itself. And what we find is the size of the planet, Earth's mass, its size, is just right to be able to provide us what we need to keep this planet. I need to stress this as we go forward. You don't want a gas giant for the planet that you're living on. I guess this kind of counts as two. That we live on a rocky terrestrial planet and the size of our planet. Both are tremendously important. We talked last week about all those various overlapping zones and how incredibly important and unlikely it was that they would all come together just perfectly in this one little slice of where we needed to be to support life on this planet. All of that is great. But if you dropped a gas giant like Jupiter right square in the middle of the exact spot where we are, well, all of those various zones that we're in wouldn't matter, because it's a gas giant. It's the wrong kind of planet to be able to support life. So you have to have a rocky terrestrial planet, and you can't have a planet, again, that's too big or too small. It sounds like the Goldilocks theory again in all of this. But you need a planet whose mass and size are just right to be able to support life. The other thing that you're going to need is an atmosphere, obviously, but you need an atmosphere that is also friendly to supporting life. I want to go back and I want to quote from Dr. Gonzales and Richards in their book. And I want you to consider this for a minute, what they're talking about. And again, when we look at the odds of what they're describing, we're getting into those universal fine-tuning odds again with numbers this big. The near-ultraviolet visible and near-infrared spectra, the light most useful to life and sight, are a razor-thin sliver of the universe's natural electromagnetic emissions, about 1 part in 10 to the 25th power. It's a big number. That is much smaller than 1 star out of all of the stars in the entire visible universe, which is 10 to the 22nd power. So the spectrum of light that we're is very rare and very unique of all the possible different kinds of light. Now, bear with me here on why that's important with our atmosphere. As it happens, our atmosphere strikes a nearly perfect balance, transmitting most of the radiation that is useful for life while blocking most of the lethal energy. Isn't it amazing that our atmosphere lets in exactly what we need to support life, but it blocks nearly everything else? So yes, obviously we still need to put on sunscreen because a little bit of harmful energy gets through. Again, put on a little sunscreen, guys, and it's not a big deal. But all things in moderation, obviously, as we're doing this. But the radiation that our atmosphere lets through happens to be just perfect. And it's not just perfect to support life. The other side of this is it's also perfect to allow us to see out into the universe. Can you imagine, back when we started this journey, we talked about Einstein's general theory of relativity. And if we couldn't see out into space, if we didn't know what was above us in the heavens above, the scientific discoveries that we've made in the last 100 years, how many of those wouldn't have been possible? How many of those would have taken centuries longer or maybe never been found? Our atmosphere seems to be perfectly designed for us to explore the universe around us, to be able to see and know and gather all this information, and at the same time allow us to live. So again, our atmosphere is phenomenal in all of this. The size of our planet and the internal makeup is also perfect to allow for a little heating to be coming up as well. We don't just get all of our heat from the sun outside of Earth. We get a little bit of heat of what's coming up from the ground beneath us. A few hundred years ago, Europe went through something called the Little Ice Age, and lots of people died because Europe went through a very severe cold spell. And that very severe cold spell killed crops and endangered the lives of millions and cost lots of people their lives during that time. We forget that we live on a razor-thin margin sometimes, and the size of our planet and the internal mechanisms of our planet allow for some of that heat and those things to come up that allow us that perfect temperature zone that we're in right now to support life. Along those same lines, and I don't want to be accused of counting some of these things twice, and I know the accusation could be made here. You remember previously we talked about when the moon impacted the Earth in the event that would eventually form the moon and bring us the planet that we have today, there was this tremendous exchange of materials from both. So what we picked up from that collision was what we needed to create the core of our planet and a lot of the interior parts of our planet, the radioactive isotopes, and the things like that allow this incredibly complex workings inside of our planet. What we can't forget is that that's what allows for the electromagnetic field that surrounds our planet that protects us from harmful radiation along with our atmosphere. So we have a very unique and very favorably designed internal structure to our planet that not only helps create that electromagnetic field, but also generates much more stability in terms of plate tectonics and things like that. If we didn't have all of those wonderful things that we picked up from this lunar collision all those years ago, we would have a much more violent and destructive planet as the plates collided into each other and as the planet tried to regulate itself. So again, Earth seems to be very unique in that regard, and we seem to have just the right group of things to support life here on this little planet of ours. We also have the right amount of water. And again, I know this goes back to the lunar collision and what was exchanged in that impact. Imagine what life would be like on Earth if the Earth was entirely covered with water. Would it be possible to have some life? Yeah, it might be possible to have some life. But we wouldn't have the life that we have. We need dry ground. We need that ability for life to be able to thrive and do things like that. And fish are important and fish are wonderful. But we would not have what we have today if we had a planet that was covered in water. You run into all sorts of problems with the amount of salt in the water and all sorts of issues if you have a planet that is completely covered in water. Amazingly, we have about the perfect amount of liquid and water and things like that to be able to support life here on this little planet. So again, Earth seems to be remarkably unique in that regard. One of the other things I don't think that we always appreciate too is the amount of light that gets reflected back from our planet into space. And again, this is a double-edged sword. If you reflect too much sunlight back into space, your planet gets cold. If you don't reflect enough light back into space, your planet can get too hot. We have a lot of natural mechanisms and a lot of natural features that bounce back a really helpful and useful amount of radiation that reflects off of the planet back into space. We also have a great many processes and things like that that are natural, that seem to be naturally built into our atmosphere and to our planet, that seem to be remarkably favorable for our existence. Again, I want to quote from Dr. Gonzales Richards tonight as we look at this, and this is talking about the carbon dioxide cycle. And just consider this for a moment. Suppose a prolonged period of large volcanic eruptions rapidly increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Through the greenhouse effect, the upsurge in carbon dioxide would raise global temperatures. Makes sense? The higher the temperature and carbon dioxide level would in turn speed up chemical weathering of rocks and things like that, and thus the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Eventually, carbon dioxide and temperature levels would return to their pre-eruption levels. These cycles that just seem to be naturally built into the planet to help regulate the planet's atmosphere. It's almost like it was designed that way. Now, could it happen on its own? I mean, sure, that could potentially happen on its own. What an amazing coincidence. That would be remarkable. But it's one remarkable thing after another and after another. And as we kind of wrap this up this evening, and we're just going to talk about a few tonight. There are so many that we could add in here, and I don't want to beat this point to death. And we've been on this journey for a very long time, so I would like to wrap this up tonight, and then I'd like to bring all of it together for next week's episode. One of the other things to consider is when we look at our planet and the makeup of our planet, it is remarkable how we have the abundance of things that we need to support life, way more so than we otherwise normally would for any other planet. Now, we talked a lot about how that happened, that the Earth seems to have begun in the center of the galaxy and then somehow worked its way to the outer edge of the galaxy. It started where it needed materials. It ended up where those materials could be best used to support life. But I want you to think about this quote from Dr. Hugh Ross's book. Many elements besides carbon also exist in highly atypical abundances on Earth. These unusual quantities result from the solar system's unique birth and the extraordinary transformations during its youth. It's amazing how we've got all of these things that we need for life. And again, we take this for granted as we go forward. And I know what you're thinking. Some of these I'm double counting, and there's a danger at this point because we've been talking about how all of the things leading up to Earth have brought us to this point where we would have all of these things. But as we start to bring it all together, it is important to consider how all of them work. When you look around this little blue planet of ours, and when you think about the way anything could have possibly gone, I started off, I think, talking about the atmosphere in one of the first 2 points tonight. If you've ever been to Yellowstone, if you haven't, you should. It's an amazing place. But if you've ever been to Yellowstone first thing in the morning when the air is kind of cool and the steam coming off the geyser basins is a little bit thick and heavy, the smell of rotten eggs, that geyser smell that is very unique to Yellowstone. It's not exactly rotten eggs, but that sulfury smell when you get there. It doesn't take much to imagine the razor-thin edge that life exists on here in this little blue planet of ours. When you go to an area like that where it just takes enough volcanic activity that the atmosphere is not always very friendly for life in certain parts of our little planet. And yet our planet manages to keep it that way. One of the interesting things that happens in Yellowstone is occasionally in low spots, you will get buildup of harmful gas, and they will find animals that are deceased one morning because the cold air traps those gases, those harmful poisonous gases in these low spots. And it can cause, groups of deer or buffalo or things like that to pass away, which is very unfortunate. But it's a reminder to us the razor thin edge that we live on, because even here on this planet that's so well designed for us, you can see how easy the pendulum swings the other way, and we see something that's hostile to life. I want to thank you for joining me tonight on this episode. We're going to wrap up next week. We're going to bring this all together and finish up. But I think this would be a good stopping point. I've been trying to take this in small doses as we've been closing up here on the end, because there's a lot of information to absorb. I want you to stand back and look around you. And as you're considering it this week, think about all of the things and how remarkably well suited we are to life. We've talked before, and I didn't even touch on this, we've talked before about how the moon's exact position and orbit influence our seasons and the Earth's rotation and all of these other things. Think about that on this end. Here in the Midwest, we're at the height of summertime right now. And it's a wonderful time. It's getting a little warm and sticky, but it's a wonderful time to be out and about enjoying all this nice warm weather. 6 months from now, it's going to be rather brisk outdoors. But that changing of the seasons and how important that is to the life cycle of creatures all over our planet, to the abundance of things that we have of resources to support life, cannot be overstated. So it's important to consider all of this, and I want to start bringing all of this together as we've talked about this on all of these episodes. And next week we will wrap them up and finish up this part of our journey as we reach life on Earth in the episodes to come, and we look at the question of, my goodness, how impossible and improbable is it that life could have evolved from nothing? Thank you for joining us this week. If you liked the episode, I hope you'll consider hitting the like button on the episode and the subscribe button on the podcast. You can find our podcasts on iTunes, on Spotify, and of course on YouTube. You can reach out to us on our website at prooftograce.com, and you can also email us at prooftograce@yahoo.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you next time. Have a great week. Bye-bye.